Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that no matter what life throws at you, anger no longer has power over you. You meet a traffic jam, and instead of simmering frustration, you feel a ripple of calm. You face injustice, yet remain centered, clear-headed, and purposeful. In the next few minutes, you'll uncover how timeless Stoic wisdom can transform anger from a fire that consumes you into a teacher that guides you, so that you too can truly never be angry again. The Stoic path to mastering anger: clarity, restraint, and freedom. Anger is one of the most primal human emotions. It rises quickly, grips us fiercely, and demands expression. In certain situations, such as facing injustice or danger, anger can alert us to a problem. But for the most part, it is not a guide to wisdom. Instead, it often distorts our vision, leads us into impulsive decisions, and leaves behind damage that is hard to undo. The Stoic philosophers understood this well, for the anger was not a harmless burst of emotion, but a real obstacle to reason, peace, and moral integrity. They saw it not as a badge of strength, but as a sign of internal imbalance, sometimes even as an indicator of hidden weakness. In this way, the Stoic view challenges the modern romanticization of venting or speaking your mind in the heat of the moment. Let's explore 5 key dimensions of anger: its distorting effect on clarity, its inefficiency as a tool, the true strength in emotional control, the freedom found in detachment, and the practical role of mindfulness in disarming it before it takes hold. Anger as a hindrance to clarity and growth. When anger flares, our perception narrows. We stop seeking truth and start seeking victory. Instead of listening to understand, we listen to counterattack. Instead of questioning our assumptions, we hunt for evidence to confirm them. The mind that was open to new insights becomes a courtroom where we act as both the attorney and the judge, defending ourselves at all costs. The Stoic teacher Epictetus would have called this a form of self-imprisonment. In his lectures, he often reminded students that the goal of life is not to be right, but to live in accordance with truth and virtue. Anger makes that almost impossible because it shifts our focus inward, not toward reflection, but toward self-protection. Psychologists today echo this insight. Neurological studies show that when the brain is flooded with anger, the amygdala, the emotional control center, takes over, suppressing activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for rational thought. This amygdala hijack is why we later regret the things we say or do in anger. Our cognitive clarity is literally shut down. There's another deeper layer to this. Many times, anger is a mask for something more fragile, a sense of inadequacy, insecurity, or perceived inferiority. The Roman philosopher Seneca went so far as to call hatred an obvious and public sign of an inferiority problem. If you look closely, the person who lashes out most fiercely often fears being seen as weak or unworthy. By recognizing this connection, we can begin to treat anger not as a moral weapon, but as a signal, an alert that there is something in us that feels threatened and needs understanding rather than indulgence. Anger is an ineffective response. Even when anger feels justified, it is rarely an effective way to resolve a situation. Shouting at someone does not increase their willingness to listen. Hurling insults may satisfy our pride for a moment, but it rarely changes behavior for the better. The idea of venting anger is one of the most enduring myths in pop psychology. People imagine that letting it out prevents harm, but research shows that venting often intensifies anger rather than dissipating it. Instead of releasing the emotion, we rehearse it, reinforcing its mental pathways. The Stoics saw this clearly. They warned that responding in anger is like grabbing a hot coal to throw at someone. You are the first person your anger burns. The damage is not only emotional, but also physical. Sustained anger has been linked to high blood pressure, cardiovascular problems, and reduced immune function. Moreover, anger often misses the mark. We lash out at the wrong person, or we misinterpret the situation entirely. A late reply to our message may not be disrespect. It may be the result of the other person's own struggles. A curt tone might not be hostility, but simple fatigue. The angrier we are, the less accurately we read reality. When we see how inefficient anger truly is, how it clouds judgment, alienates allies, and erodes trust, it becomes easier to view it not as a source of empowerment, but as a liability. Emotional control as inner victory. Modern culture often confuses self-control with weakness. People fear that if they do not stand up for themselves in the form of visible outrage, they will be seen as passive or submissive. But the Stoics held the opposite view. The ability to stay composed under fire is not a sign of timidity, but of immense power. Imagine being insulted publicly. The common reaction is to retaliate, to prove that you are not to be underestimated. But retaliation usually traps you in the other person's frame. They dictate the emotional terms of the exchange. Remaining calm denies them that control. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor of Rome, reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." In practice, this means recognizing that the only true victory is mastery over our own reactions. When you can stand in the middle of a storm and keep your reasoning intact, you gain a kind of inner freedom that no insult, no setback, and no injustice can take from you. That is not weakness. That is sovereignty. Detach from what you cannot control. One of the most enduring lessons of Stoicism is the distinction between what is in our control and what is not. Our thoughts, choices, and actions are ours to command. External events, the opinions of others, and the passage of time are not. Anger thrives when we cling to expectations about things outside our control. We expect others to act according to our standards. We expect events to unfold in our favor. When reality diverges from these expectations, we feel wronged, as if the world has violated a personal agreement it never signed. By consciously releasing attachment to outcomes we cannot guarantee, we cut off much of anger's fuel supply. This is not about apathy or indifference, it is about strategic focus. If I accept that I cannot control someone's rudeness but can control my response, I am free to choose dignity over rage. Detachment is not withdrawal from life. It is engagement with clarity. It allows us to act decisively without being enslaved to the results. Mindfulness and delayed response. Even with philosophical clarity, anger can still rise in us. It is, after all, a natural emotion. The difference lies in what we do next. The Stoics advocated practical techniques to prevent the first spark from becoming a wildfire. One is deliberate silence. By refusing to answer immediately, you allow the initial surge of adrenaline to fade. Another is the simple act of counting, perhaps to 4, perhaps to 10, before speaking or acting. These pauses are not signs of uncertainty, but of disciplined restraint. Mindfulness practices such as observing your breath or labeling your emotions, "I feel anger rising," create space between stimulus and response. In that space, reason can step in. Modern neuroscience confirms that such micro-pauses can help re-engage the prefrontal cortex, restoring rational thinking. Patience is not passive. It is active self-mastery. The person who waits before responding does not avoid conflict out of fear, but engages with it on their own terms, in their own time. Anger as a mirror, not an enemy. In traditional Stoic teachings, anger is often painted as a destructive force, a tempest of the soul that clouds reason and hinders virtue. The goal, we are told, is to eliminate it entirely. While I respect the clarity of that position, I believe there's room for a more nuanced approach. Anger, in many cases, is not inherently our enemy. It's a mirror. When anger rises within us, it's rarely random. It's often pointing towards something important, something that matters deeply to our sense of self. It may reveal a core value being violated, a personal boundary being crossed, or an expectation we hold dear that has been unmet. This is why the first step in handling anger is not immediate suppression, but inquiry. Ask yourself, what belief, value, or principle of mine is being challenged right now? Sometimes the answer will expose unreasonable expectations, moments where our pride or ego has inflated the importance of an event. Other times, it will point to legitimate wrongs, injustices, or disrespect that should be addressed. Seeing anger as a mirror means shifting from self-condemnation, "I shouldn't be angry," to self-exploration. What is my anger trying to tell me? This approach allows us to transform raw emotion into a tool for greater self-awareness, rather than a weapon we turn inward or outward without thought. Reframing anger as a teacher. If we stop treating anger solely as an adversary, we can begin to see it as a teacher. Teachers, after all, are not always gentle. They challenge, confront, and demand growth from us. Anger is like that. It's a stern instructor, but a valuable one. When anger appears, it's worth pausing to ask, what unmet expectation triggered this reaction? Is there a better way to express what I'm feeling? Can I address the situation constructively without losing my center? The beauty of this reframing is that it integrates Stoic principles without denying the validity of human emotion. The Stoics emphasized rationality and composure, but they also valued self-examination. Using anger as a signal for deeper questions transforms it from a purely destructive force into a stepping stone for personal growth. By reframing, we stop trying to wrestle anger into submission and instead learn from it. The more we practice this, the more we'll notice that anger loses its sharpness, not because we've numbed ourselves, but because we've become skilled at interpreting its lessons before they overwhelm us. Emotion doesn't define morality. The Stoic caution against anger often comes from its association with irrationality, yet not all anger is the same. While uncontrolled rage can be destructive, there exists another form, righteous indignation, that can be grounded in moral clarity. Consider the moments in history when injustice was challenged: the fight for civil rights, the resistance against tyranny, the defense of the vulnerable. These movements often drew their initial energy from a deep and burning sense that something was wrong. That spark was, in essence, anger. But it was not the petty, ego-driven variety. It was a moral refusal to accept wrongdoing. The critical skill here is discernment. We must learn to distinguish between egoic anger, which seeks to defend our pride, and principled anger, which seeks to protect truth and justice. The first corrodes the soul. The second, if guided with wisdom and restraint, can be a force for good. This is where Stoicism offers balance. Righteous indignation must be tempered by reason so that the pursuit of justice does not become an excuse for cruelty. Anger can ignite moral courage, but reason must steer the flame. Daily practices that fortify. Knowing the theory of emotional control is one thing, embodying it is another. For that, daily habits are essential. Beyond the Stoic practice of pausing before reacting, there are additional methods I've found particularly effective. 1. Evening reflection. At the end of the day, take 5 minutes to journal about moments that stirred irritation or anger. Don't just recount the events. Ask yourself what belief or expectation was involved. Then, consciously reframe it. Could this trigger be seen differently? Could it be a chance to strengthen patience, empathy, or detachment? 2. Mindful micro breaks. The very first moment you feel the surge of irritation, before the words form, before your tone sharpens, pause. Take one deep, intentional breath. This tiny act interrupts the autopilot of reaction and creates a gap where choice can emerge. 3. Gratitude in anger's wake. It may sound strange, but after an episode of anger, especially one you've navigated without escalation, take a moment to feel gratitude. That disturbance just revealed something about your priorities. Even unpleasant emotions are information, and information is power when we know how to use it. Over time, these small acts of self-awareness compound. They don't just reduce the frequency of anger, they transform your relationship with it entirely. Anger, empathy, and restraint. Stoicism rightly emphasizes self-control, but control does not mean cold detachment from others' humanity. When someone's words or actions irritate us, there is often an unseen story behind them, a stress, fear, or insecurity that we cannot immediately perceive. This is where empathy becomes a crucial counterweight to anger. It does not excuse poor behavior, but it can diffuse the emotional charge that might otherwise spiral into conflict. When we remember that others are fighting their own battles, we're less likely to take their provocations personally. Empathy transforms anger into compassionate firmness. You can still set boundaries, you can still speak the truth, but you do so from a place of grounded clarity, not reactive hostility. That balance is both a stoic and a deeply human ideal. Anger's long-term cost versus brief satisfaction. The original video notes a striking truth. Every minute you spend angry is 60 seconds of happiness lost. I would add that the cost is often far greater. Anger can damage relationships in ways that take years to repair, if they can be repaired at all. It can leave a residue in our memories, tinting how we recall events and people. It can narrow our perspective until we see only the offense, forgetting the full humanity of the other person. The danger is that short-term venting often feels satisfying. There's a rush in getting it off your chest, in delivering the sharp remark or winning the argument, but that satisfaction is fleeting. What lingers afterward, regret, guilt, fractured trust, is rarely worth the price. The maturity that Stoic practice invites is the ability to choose long-term peace over momentary triumph. That means holding back the impulse to lash out, not because we're weak, but because we value something greater than the fleeting thrill of retaliation, choosing inner peace over outward victory. Anger can at times help us win arguments. A raised voice, a forceful stance, it can intimidate or silence an opponent. But if the cost is our inner calm, is it really a victory? The Stoic answer is a resounding no. True victory is staying true to oneself, even under provocation. It's walking away from conflict with a steady mind and an untroubled conscience. The world may not applaud such quiet wins, but they are the victories that sustain us. When we choose inner peace over outward victory, we not only protect our own mental well-being, we model for others what strength really looks like. It is not in the loudest voice or the harshest words, but in the calm, measured presence that refuses to be shaken. You will never be angry again, not because anger will vanish, but because you will respond differently. The truth is, you will still feel that surge, that spark in your chest, that tightening in your jaw and again, because you are human. Stoicism does not ask you to cut out the nerves that feel. It asks you to govern them. The measure of mastery is not the absence of provocation, it is the absence of surrender to it. This is where most people misunderstand emotional discipline. They imagine it as suppression, a tight-lipped silence, a forced smile while resentment simmers beneath the skin. But that is simply anger wearing a polite mask. Stoicism's call is not to bottle up the fire, but to transmute it into something you can hold without burning yourself. When you feel anger rising, you are being offered a moment of pure awareness, a mirror into your own mind. That sting when someone criticizes you in public, it might not be about the words they used at all. It might be about your own hidden insecurity, the part of you that still seeks validation. That irritation when someone ignores your advice, maybe it's less about their decision and more about your own desire to be respected as an authority. Anger, when examined, often reveals a wound, an unmet need for recognition, security, or justice. The Stoic approach is to turn the attention inward, to ask, what in me is reacting so strongly? And is this reaction serving me or chaining me? Anger as a distortion of reality. The danger with anger is not only that it feels unpleasant, it's that it warps perception. In anger, you don't see people as they are. You see them as threats or obstacles. You stop listening. You stop learning. Your vision narrows, and your goal subtly shifts from seeking truth to defending your ego. This is why so many arguments spiral into absurdity. Both sides have stopped aiming for resolution and are instead trying to win. Anger promises strength but delivers fragility. It tells you you are fighting for what is right, but in truth, you may simply be fighting for your pride. The Stoics saw this clearly. Seneca wrote, "Anger, if not restrained, is frequently more hurtful to us than the injury that provokes it." Think about that. The insult or inconvenience that sparked your fury is temporary. But the damage you do in your rage, strained relationships, reckless words, rash decisions, can last far longer. Hatred and bitterness, too, are simply anger allowed to calcify. They are public signs of an inferiority problem, evidence that something in you feels small and threatened. You don't have to accept this diagnosis as an insult. You can take it as an invitation to grow. Why letting it out rarely works. We often hear, "Don't bottle it up, just let it out." The problem is, letting it out usually means releasing the unfiltered, unrefined reaction onto another person or the world around you. Shouting, slamming doors, crafting long, angry messages, these rarely provide the clarity or closure we imagine they will. In fact, they rehearse the anger. Each time you let rage run its course unchecked, you strengthen the habit of reacting impulsively. You train your mind and body to associate frustration with immediate outburst. The Stoic alternative is not passive, it's deeply active. It involves processing the emotion without becoming it. You don't pretend you're not angry, but you refuse to hand over the steering wheel. Marcus Aurelius himself, despite ruling an empire, was deliberate in this. He would write reminders to himself like, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." Notice the quiet strength in that. He's not saying, don't get revenge because it's morally wrong, but don't get revenge because it changes you into the very thing you oppose. Restraint as a sign of power. We live in a culture that often mistakes volume for power. The loudest voice in the room, the most aggressive posture, the fastest clapback. These are celebrated as strength. But if your power depends on a spike of adrenaline and a raised voice, it is fragile power. The strongest person is the one who remains composed even under fire, the one who can hear an insult, process it, and choose whether to respond or simply walk away. Restraint does not signal weakness. It signals that you are unshaken, that you are in possession of yourself. This is why, in Stoicism, composure is not just a personality trait, it is a form of victory. You can be insulted without becoming insulting. You can be provoked without becoming provocative. And in doing so, you break the chain of escalation that anger feeds on. Control what you can, release what you cannot. At the root of much anger is a failure to distinguish between what is within our control and what is not. You can control your words, your tone, your next action. You cannot control another person's opinion, their gratitude or lack of it, their past mistakes, or the traffic on the road. When you fuse your emotional well-being to things outside your control, you hand over the keys to your peace. If your mood depends on whether people treat you fairly, you will live in constant agitation because fairness is subjective and the world does not owe you your definition of it. Epictetus said it bluntly, there is only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will. This is not fatalism, it is focus. It means reserving your energy for where it can actually make a difference, mindfulness and the pause. One of the simplest yet most transformative Stoic practices for anger is the deliberate pause. When you feel the rush of heat in your chest or the urge to fire back instantly, you stop, you breathe, you count, maybe to 4, maybe to 10. You give yourself a gap between stimulus and response. This gap is everything. In that space, you can choose a response aligned with your values instead of one dictated by your reflexes. You can remember that the first thought that comes to you in anger is rarely the wisest. Sometimes the best immediate response is none at all. Silence can be a shield, a signal that you are not going to be dragged into an unproductive exchange. You are not avoiding the issue, you are approaching it on your own terms. Transforming anger into understanding. When anger appears, you can use it as a teacher. Ask yourself, what exactly am I reacting to? Which of my expectations or values does this touch? What would a wise, calm version of me do right now? By turning your attention to these questions, you shift from being in the anger to observing it. And once you observe it, you can direct it. Perhaps your anger about injustice can be turned into focused advocacy. Perhaps your irritation at someone's laziness can be turned into a clearer conversation about responsibilities. The key is to move from reactive energy to constructive energy. You will still feel the heat, but you will not burn. Imagine the next time someone cuts you off in traffic, speaks over you in a meeting, or sends a text dripping with passive aggression. You feel that familiar rise in temperature. In the past, you might have reacted instantly, snapping, honking, typing a sharp reply. But now, you pause. You observe the emotion like a wave approaching the shore. You name it. This is anger from feeling disrespected. You reframe it. This moment shows me how much I value respect, and we redirect it. Given that, what is the wisest next move? You may still choose to address the situation, but now you do so with clarity rather than blind heat. And that difference changes everything. Your relationships, your reputation, your peace. Conclusion. The real victory. The Stoics never promised a life without provocation. They promised that you could become unshakable in the face of it, that you could live in a world full of offenses, irritations, and injustices and remain the master of your own mind. In the end, anger will knock at your door many times. The goal is not to pretend you're not home. The goal is to answer with wisdom instead of rage, to turn that initial surge into a moment of reflection, to let the energy of the emotion sharpen your awareness instead of clouding it. This is the quiet, enduring victory of the Stoic. Not a life without storms, but a life where the storms no longer control the course of the ship. You will never be angry again, not because the emotion will vanish, but because you will never again be its prisoner.